Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today's Wednesday, October 22nd, the year of our Lord 2025. And this is Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Thanks for listening today. Good to be back. Thanks for listening to yesterday's lengthy episode. It won't be quite as long today. It's Wednesday on the Chief Sports Network. That means we've got a lot going on. Content wise, Tailgate Talks has been released with Stephen Garcia and Pat DeMarco. You can check the audio MP3 podcast version on the app if you want to listen to it in your car. Also, their YouTube channel, youtube.com/at tailgate talks 547. Please go hit that subscribe button over there. Help those guys out and grow that channel. That's the full unedited version. Then, of course, it's on Gamecocks Plus as well. AJ McCarron, a guy that I covered as a recruit, always liked him as a quarterback. Um, and he does some media here and there. A former Alabama QB. He's going to he's the guest today, this week. As the Gamecocks are playing Alabama, of course, Pat and Steven were on that 2010 team that won the SEC East and defeated the Crimson Tide 35-21, 3:30 kickoff in October. Of course, that's the kickoff time this weekend. The Tide rolled in here in 2019 at 3:30 as well and won 47-23. So, everybody's looking forward to that on the Alabama end coming over. And the Gamecocks are looking forward to the game as well. You look at the matchups, we're going to dive into the Tide more tomorrow on specifics. I'll just say this this year's Alabama team is playing a lot more like Kalen DeBoer's Washington teams did and his teams at Fresno State. Seems like he's kind of putting his stamp on it. Last year was a transition year. This year they look much more, like what he does on offense, throwing the football. They run it, but they're a passing offense. Ty Simpson could win the Heisman Trophy. Add that to the list of things I didn't see coming this year in college football. Nobody else did either. But they're really good. They're on a roll. They've played a gauntlet of games. I think how many four ranked teams in a row they've beaten. But the fact of the matter is this: they play some close games on the road and lose sometimes under Kalen DeBoer so far. Florida State beat them earlier this year. They won a 3-point decision at Georgia and a 3-point decision at Missouri. I'm not downplaying those games. Georgia and Missouri are very good football teams, and those were very big wins by the Tide. And, they kind of controlled the Missouri game. And then the Tigers responded and made it a close one there at the end. But it's an impressive football team. And I can't tell you if Carolina has the issues on offense again this weekend that it's going to be a close one, But my point in saying that is, when you're talking about hope and a reason to watch the game is that, it's a situation just like with Carolina's offense. Until you do it, you haven't done it. And Alabama has not gone in and been like the Bama under Nick Saban and blown teams out in their own house and all that. So there's a chance for a competitive game this weekend, especially if they, fix some things, as Shane Beamer in his press conference yesterday talked about. Is it short term, long term? Who knows? I'll say this, just in terms of talking to people, um, connected folks that would know, changes are going to come after this season. I think, regardless of what happens for the rest of the year, barring like a miracle turnaround. And even at that, and you got to be careful with that. Let's say, let's dare to dream a little bit, and all of a sudden the offensive fixes are simple, or there's a new play caller, and they start going up. And if there's a new play caller, obviously the whoever takes over, if they do a good job, you have to kind of consider that as a change. But let's say all of a sudden Mike Shula decides he's in college football and this is what he's going to do. He's going to let it fly and call it more like a college game. And the offense starts scoring and they get on a roll and win games, maybe win out. Um, there's probably a little bit more of a decision, but and you got to be careful with it because I remember I'm going to use some Clemson football history here, folks. How about that? In '03, nobody wants to remember the '03 Clemson Carolina game. Tommy Bowden was about to get fired. They lost 45-17 at Wake Forest, and everybody was mad. Obviously, that was the first time he almost got fired, and the next time he lost at Wake Forest, I think he did get fired. Obviously in '08, but they had a nice thing going. Brad Scott, Mike O'Kane started calling it. Charlie Whitehurst started dialing up plays down the field. They beat Florida State. They were third in the country in the Bowden Bowl. Beat Carolina, obviously. Beat Tennessee in the Peach Bowl. Finished, I think, 9-4. Really, were one of the hottest teams in the country in '03 heading down the stretch. But then Bowden switched it up. He took Brad Scott off a play call and put Mike O'Kane on, and they struggled the next year. So sometimes you got to be careful with that. But what are the chances Carolina gets on a roll and against this schedule and ends up doing it? I hope they get to a bowl game. People may say, well, what's the point? There is a point to making the postseason and keeping the trajectory and the baseline of the program above water. Losing seasons are bad. Look at Auburn and Florida. I mean, those teams played for a combined 4 national championships in 7 years. They won 3 of them from '06 to '13. Those programs did. And look at them now. One's already got another coaching change when Billy Gonzalez leads the Gators on the field in Jacksonville against the Dogs here in a couple of weeks. That'll be the 11th coach counting interim since Steve Spurrier left at the end of '01 to coach the Gators. And Auburn's been in a mess. Now, a lot of it's because of the Brian Harsin era and kind of an erosion of their roster, but their roster's back and they're still losing. And add this to the list of things you don't expect. I thought Hugh Freeze would tear it up there. I mean, he's won everywhere he's been until he got to Auburn. So sometimes massive amounts of change can backfire on you completely, no matter what everybody wants. But back to the assistant thing, I believe changes are coming. I don't think Shane Beamer's happy with this, and he's going to examine everything. And, we're going to get to his kind of press conference lament here in a little bit. But, we'll see what happens. But I did want to communicate that to you fine folks out there that, from what I've been told, I don't know what, but I think some changes are coming. I think it obviously starts with the offensive side of the football. Because consistently through 5 years, even if the defense has not been super, there's been periods it hasn't. I think this is a good Carolina defense this season. I think it's not obviously the group from last year when you're missing, some of those pieces. And we knew that going in. But, and I think the biggest one they miss, I said this over the summer, is Nicky Minore. He was such a guy that run game, pass game, it didn't matter. There's a reason they call safeties safeties. It's like the safety, like, you're safe if those guys are back there. And it's not that the other safeties aren't playing well or they're bad players or they're huge liabilities. It's just that he was such a freak back there, stopping the run, stopping the pass, whatnot. But it's a good defense. I mean, it's a defense that's played well enough in every single game for South Carolina to win. If including the Vanderbilt game, which was, I guess, the worst loss of the season. Had some issues early against Oklahoma, but they did adjust. Giving up that many rushing yards isn't good. But you look at Clayton White, through his 5 years here, they've been consistently pretty good. They're good at getting turnovers. It's a different type of defense than maybe Ellis Johnson had here. I don't know how realistic having a defense like that is. I'll even go back to Charlie Strong under Lou Holtz 20-something years ago, where you could go win games 14-6 in this league. Around the time Saban revamped his offense, it must be nice to revamp your offense when you're playing, competing for national championships regardless. Was when Lane Kiffin got there in '16. The offense is 16 was kind of, but 17, 18, they started getting better and better in the SEC. SEC was a very, very kind of low scoring defensive kind of league now. Um, Everybody's good everywhere. So, you got to be able to put up points, but so I don't know how realistic it is to shut everybody out. Like we used to see when Ellis was the D coordinator at Carolina, and Carolina to play these 16-10 type of ball games. But not that you can't win 16-10 sometimes around the SEC these days. But I think for what Carolina does, for the recruiting footprint they're in, for the players they have access to, Clayton White's got a good scheme of things. Um, and you see it's very creative and fun and all that good stuff. And that's important. That's important. Special teams have been good around here. A lot of people are frustrated about the fake punts and all that got not working. I think we all got spoiled in 2022 when Pistol Pete Limbo, it was like he was the Midas touch guy. Everything he touched turned to gold and worked. That was unprecedented, by the way. I think Carolina only failed on one fake kick in 2022, maybe not any of them. A lot of them scored touchdowns. So, yeah, some fakes have misfired the last couple of years for sure, but I think overall, there's still positives on special teams even this season. Vakari Swain obviously had, and that's another thing you get spoiled on, three touchdown returns in two games. That's going to be crazy, but and it hadn't happened since. But that's just the nature of it. When those crazy things happen, you can't count on them. But I really respected Vakari getting out there with the broken finger, and if you look at the game, he and Jaden Sellers, really of two people that had the ball on Saturday, and Cutter Woods in mop up duty obviously played well. Um, they made the biggest impact. Vakari Swain had some good punt returns and got Carolina and Oklahoma territory and all that good stuff. So, I think those two sections of the program right now are fine. Just keep recruiting and keep going. It's the offense. So change is coming. Did want to mention a little about basketball. Don't turn the channel. It'll be brief. uh, the Garnet and Black, I guess showcase or whatever last night. Waka Flocka Flame was there. That's pretty cool. Um, and as far as the men's basketball team goes, I'll share this with you. Something I was told. They feel, and I felt this, during the transfer portal and all that. You heard this, Lamont Paris and the staff. They feel like last year. Let me back up. Lamont Paris is a system basketball coach, which is good because around here, you don't always recruit. You don't have access to the top of the line guys in basketball. You could try, I think, you can recruit good players. Don't get me wrong. Eli Ellis was a good player and a kind of a highly rated recruit. Obviously, Colin Murray Boyles is kind of a find, but first round draft pick, lottery pick or whatever. So you can get good players here, but you kind of got to be a little different and kind of a special prep. Frank Martin, that year he went to the Final Four. That was different. You want to know why they went to the Final Four other than everybody, PJ Dozier, Rotfelder, even Justin Mackey, Sindarius, obviously, Chris Silva, Mike Kozar, kind of getting on a roll all at the same time. It was because they were one of the longest backcourts in college basketball, and then Frank Martin's pressure defense. You don't see that if you're in the ACC, if you're not playing South Carolina all the time. The same reason he won when he got in the tournament at Kansas State. You just don't see it. And that obviously gave a lot of teams some problems. Uh, and the toughness and all that. So when South Carolina's been good, the very few times they've been kind of a team that's a little different. 2 years ago, when they went 26-8 and nearly won the league, a little different, and that's Lamont Paris. And I know that a lot of people, because of the disappointment of last year, then baseball, now football, it's just like a lot of things right now. It's like, JC, I don't believe anything. Don't trust but verify. It's preseason, man. And I'm not making any predictions at all about basketball. Could be another bad year. They're picked last in the SEC. I don't know that anybody wouldn't on paper. But what gives them hope is that last season, one of the fundamental problems was, and you hear this sometimes in hoops. It's not like football. If you're running a system, like Lamont Paris isn't over there dialing up plays. Some basketball coaches do. That's set plays, you're 1, 2, whatever. You see them over there doing it. Paris's offense is kind of similar to the motion offense Bobby Knight ran back, started, basically created in Indiana. It's based on rules and concepts. So in other words, if this, then this, and if this, then this. And you got to be a smart player and an unselfish player on top of that, and work to get the good shot and then make the shot when it's there. Most importantly, make the shot when it's there. And that didn't happen a lot last year. And it wasn't Murray Boyle so much as some other guys. They're no longer with the program that just weren't, they either weren't fits or they weren't doing what they're supposed to do. Now, but think about this. If you don't believe me, and I don't blame you if you don't, but there's some proof out there when you look at last season. Carolina beat a Sweet 16 team in Arkansas and John Calipari pretty good at home one Saturday. Just jumped up and beat them by 19 points or so. They beat Texas, who was a tournament team. They took Auburn, a Final Four team, to the wire. Just a little bit better decisions, more clutch free throw shooting. They win that game. They took national champion Florida to the wire. Should have won the game. Had them down. In those games, those players ran the offense, ran the system, played defense, did what they had to do. And they just didn't at other points. So it works if you run it. And so what I've heard was, with all the new players and Michi coming back and all that, is that they're excited because these guys, kind of like that team 2 years ago, they run it. And on paper, there's not a lot of superstars. You look who are the best players. Well, it's Michi Johnson's probably there. He's all SEC a couple of years ago. And who else? We don't know. It's a lot of guys, that Mike Sharf jams. Mongolian Mike is a very intriguing player, obviously. Eli Ellis is a very intriguing freshman. That's an exciting player, but you don't have a lot of proven stars. And that can work in your favor sometimes. The non-conference schedule is not all that crazy. I know Virginia Tech's picked low in the ACC, but I know they're excited about this year, Virginia Tech in basketball. But they come to Columbia. You got Clemson, and you got the tournament in West Virginia where Butler and Northwestern will be the opponents. And then other than that, well, you better win. Don't lose like you did in North Florida at the beginning of last year. But Southern Miss comes in to renew that old Metro Conference rivalry. I remember when I was a kid, Carolina was in the Metro, home and home with Southern Miss. Carolina, for some reason, could not win in Hattiesburg, but they usually beat the Golden Eagles when they came to Columbia. So that's the hope in men's basketball. And I'm, obviously, like I said, no predictions at all. I just, you don't want to get ahead of yourself, but on paper, it's not a team that's going to jump out at you and not going to impress the experts, but who cares? I mean, I think that Carolina's chance until they run off however many winning seasons and trip to the NCAA tournament in a row, if they do, then you can start maybe thinking about, well, we got a little more star power. I mean, remember Lamont Paris came from Wisconsin, and Wisconsin eventually, once they started winning and under both, they would get some good recruits. But some schools in basketball have to win other ways. Some schools in football have to win other ways, but basketball in particular, and it's very transient and stuff. But it does sound like they feel like this year, last year they were excited about the talent. So don't. You may say, well, what about all the expectations behind the scenes last year? Because it was like the summer of basketball last year. I mean, everybody's fired up, thought they were going to be really good. I'm not getting that now. We're going to be great. I'm getting, hey, this what Carolina basketball did well 2 years ago, this team can do that. What does it mean? I don't know. It could mean like Vanderbilt last year was not expected to be that good. Went to the tournament under their first year head coach, who's a good coach. Not a lot on paper there at Vanderbilt, but they were a good basketball team. Could mean that. Could mean a lot of close losses. Could mean 12 and 20 again. Who knows? But I do think there's compared to the end of last year, there's a higher comfort level with the roster. So hoops will be right around the corner. I think 1st of November. I can't believe they start college basketball this early, folks. I hate it, but because it gets lost, and I like college basketball. And then we don't hear about it in December, and that's weird to me. But maybe I'm just getting old. Back to football. Okay, so press conferences yesterday. So I'm reading this from my man Wes Mitchell's Twitter. He did a really good job of posting the full quote here on X. Here's Shane Beamer's quote. Now, this quote, if you watch it live, you kind of understand, Shane's hurting just like the rest of us. Um, and I can respect that. Uh, is I talked about head coaches and their fiduciary duties and responsibilities, and I mentioned that I was not a fan of the reaction about the play calling question at all, and I stand by that. Stand by the criticism of the offense. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going, oh well, it's all right, But listen to this. I mean, it's like I understand there's noise out there and there should be. I'm not happy with where we are right now. I'm going to get it fixed. And I can tell you again, according to some contacts, he's told a lot of people that behind the scenes. That, that's kind of the gist of it. Going to get it fixed. As the leader and the head coach of this program, I realize that I'm letting a lot of people down right now with the way we were playing. Our players, I feel like I'm letting them down. Our coaches, our players' families, our coaches' families, the student body. 80,000 people that pack Williams-Brice Stadium every Saturday. The state of South Carolina, from Charleston to Myrtle Beach to the upstate, the Midlands. There's a lot of people that live and die with Gamecock football on Saturdays, and I get it. They're not happy, and neither am I. And I take that personally because I truly feel like I'm letting a lot of people down right now. I'm working hard each and every week to get it fixed, making the decisions schematically, personnel-wise, staff-wise, each and every week to get it fixed. And it's a process, but we're going to get it fixed. We're not far off from where we want to be. Okay, so let's unpack this. A lot of people jump right on the we're not far off from where we want to be because you've heard that all year. Not far off. Well, I don't know. Looks like you're getting further away because you see it on Saturdays on offense specifically. Now, I that was kind of a throw in. It's kind of like when he says as well, you know. Um, I thought it was heartfelt. I don't know if coaches around here have apologized to the fans before, but you know, this was a little bit more on a personal level, and that's just Shane Beamer and the pride he takes in the job. I think he realizes, they've kind of stepped in it with what they're trying to do offensively this year, and some years you just don't have it. Some years it's like, well, it's not the players, or there's a lot of like injuries. He was asked how the offensive line injury situation was similar to 2023. Well, it's not. That year, you didn't have depth to begin with. One of the keys to the entire season was the offensive line. A lot of those veterans playing number one, their best football, and they didn't. And then there's guys like Tyshawn Wanamaker that were really good at times throughout their career, and then all of a sudden fell off the face of the earth. And then other guys got hurt, uh, and you ended up having to go with Tree and Tro as true freshmen. Nick Gargiulo was banged up at the end of the year. I mean, it was a tough year. Uh, that's why I don't. When we talk about the body of work with Lonnie Teasley and Dowell Loggins, I ain't gonna beat them up for 2023. But this is different. This is a little more like the wide receiver core last year, where guys are kind of just in and out. There's not, with the exception of Case and Henry, and my heart goes out to that guy because he's playing his best football. And once again, he gets hurt, separates his shoulder on the first play of a game, just like he did against North Carolina in 2023. And so that stinks. But the rest of these guys are back. He said they're as healthy as they've been since the Missouri game this week in practice. So it's nothing where it's more like guys going out during games. So it's nothing like 2023. And he said that. He said it's different. He said it's different. It's a challenge, but it's different. The offensive line struggles have been more about like what they're not doing. That's why there was a coaching change there. And they at least got the penalties cleaned up, even with all the people coming in and out of the lineup. So, you look at that. So it's not like the 2023 season where you just don't have it. There were other problems with that team too. They had very, very, it was masked a little bit once they went to the three-man front at the end. The defense could not set the edge. They were very limited at edge. I mean, even now, even when Dylan Stewart was out Saturday, it's a night and day better situation at defensive end than it was that year. You had a secondary where they had to move some guys around and end up getting people in the right spot. The linebackers were kind of limited speed wise. And then at receiver and running back, there were deficiencies all over, uh, namely because of injuries in 2023. That is not the case this year. So just understand that, and I think Beamer understands that as well. Um, you know, you, and his comments are different. I don't think he said, "I'm not getting the most out of this team" in 2023. Um, I think this year it definitely rings true. And so I've said this. I said it on the Big Spur. I've said it here. Some of these folks out here that are wanting to fire Beamer, that are do what I do, or sort of, get out and publicly state that. Um, I don't think that's the best thing for the program. You can disagree with me all you want. I do think that, there are five more games, and, I do think things could always get worse. Trust me, they could always get worse. But I don't think right now anybody needs to be rooting for a head coaching change. A head coaching change. Um, I think that, the idea is for to take all the good they've done. I mean, look, man, nobody has won more games against top 25 opponents in their first 5 years here than Shane Beamer. I mean, that's just a fact. Nobody has recruited out of state five-star talent as well as Shane Beamer. It's just a fact. Shane Beamer's biggest problem since he's been here has been stubbornness and blind. I don't want to say blindness, but just the how as to how he wants to do the offense. I know what he wants to do on offense, and I agree with it. I've said it. The what is balanced offense, not a pass happy attack necessarily. Because some coordinators you go higher, the air raids have sort of evolved through the years, and some of those offenses are really good at running the ball, quite frankly. But some guys just want to throw it all the time. Throw, 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 throw. Some just very conservative and want to run it all the time. He doesn't want either one of them. He wants the one that attacks both, different ways. But that's a very general, you know, over, big picture kind of thing, which is what the head coach should do. But what the head coach also has to be good at doing is the how. So how are you going to have this offense? And, unfortunately, you've got an F, a C, and an F with the three hires. Okay. And so something has to change because that's been holding that's kept South Carolina from winning more. I mean, you think about all the issues before the end that they had in 2022, when they finally fixed it. And you saw what happened. And boy, you look back on that team, they had a lot of weapons on offense, Spencer Rattler. And the line blocked pretty well once they started, you know, doing things that made sense. And, you look back on that season, South Carolina, finished 8-4 in the regular season. Three of those losses were to teams that finished 6-6: Missouri, Florida, and Arkansas. I don't know that they go out there and beat Arkansas in game two because the Hogs are kind of rolling at the time. Rocket Sanders obviously ran all over the Gamecocks, but the Missouri and Florida games, better plans on offense changes those, and they were awful, god awful. There was no reason for that. Now, so you kind of look at it, man, and let's say they were able to score more against Arkansas, maybe win a shootout out there. You win those three games, and then you beat Tennessee and Clemson at the end of the year. You're not in obviously the SEC championship game because we still had divisions, but South Carolina's probably in the college football playoff in 2022, his second year. Last year it took a little while to get things going. Now I called Dowell Loggins to see how because I think he figured it out and he called some creative plays. I mean, Carolina's about to go play Alabama. One of the greatest, best calls that took guts, but it was the right call to make, was the touchdown pass on 4th and 10. That changed the whole season at Alabama last year to Mazeo Bennett. Where's Mazeo Bennett, by the way? Where is that play? How many? I mean, anyway, I don't want to keep going through all that. But, the last year, struggles early on offense um, probably kept them out of the playoff, So, when he says they're not far off, they're not. But why? Well, it's because there just hasn't been a good plan on offense. Whether that's somebody trying to be a mad scientist, taking things in and out of the game plan every week and confusing the crap out of the kids. Whether that's, trying to figure out how to play Lenore Sellers early last year and, all that. Or whether that's um, I guess what's happening this year, which was, again, for the life of me, making Lenore Sellers into a pocket passer. That's fine. Teach him how to do it, but it's 90% of the playbook. And then having a play caller that, quite frankly, just is not, the way he calls plays is just not it's not SEC football in 2025. That's just a fact. I don't know how it's going to change this weekend, but my guess is something will change. But those have been the problems. Okay. And it's not an easy fix, obviously, because if it was easy, you'd do it. But I think, you know, what is it? TLC that sings that song, Free Your Mind and the Rest Will Follow. I think he's got to free his mind and open himself up to some college possibility. Don't overthink it. You look around the country, who would have thought Vanderbilt by going, that hiring Tim Beck and Jerry Kill and getting Pavia and stuff from New Mexico State at Vanderbilt, was one of the smartest things anybody's ever done. It was Clark Lee. Everybody was just sitting there going, well, they're really bad, and how are they going to compete in the portal era? Well, there they go. They said, well, we're going to start running good offense. I mean, look at what it's done for Oklahoma. And Oklahoma's not scoring a bunch of points, but guess what? They can put points on the board. Nobody these days, unless you're playing one of these teams in the league that you really have to question how good they are on defense. I think Ole Miss is one of those. Although they played pretty good against LSU. I think Arkansas is one of those. I think Texas A&M half the time isn't. Tennessee definitely is not stellar on D. Unless you're playing one of those teams, even Kentucky, who's not very good on D, like I mentioned this yesterday, held Texas to 16. But the scores of the games around the league are 20 to something. It's not. Missouri's playing probably some of the best D. Auburn, I think, is an underrated defensive football team right now. South Carolina's playing pretty solid. Oklahoma's elite on defense. It's just not a situation where in the league right now this year you're going to put up a bunch of points, even if you have a great offense. Now, that said, you have to have enough. You can't be, sometimes I'm talking to some of my friends and my Clemson buddy, and don't ask me what's wrong with Clemson. Carolina's had enough problems this year. I really have watched and dug into Clemson less than I ever have this year. Um, just because, Carolina's got their own problems. But I was talking to somebody there, it's like, Clemson sometimes they'll be disappointing and all that. And then, and you know it during games, sometimes Clemson will lose a noon game and everybody be fired up. And then you get to the nightcap with Carolina. It's like, don't underestimate Carolina's ability to screw it up even worse than the Tigers did. Oh, that happens. That's happened a lot in my life. Um, but it's one of those things. And I was talking to a buddy of mine about that the other day. It's like, misery loves company, and you see some teams that just aren't able to do whatever on offense. So you're not going to score a ton, but you have to score enough. And so you look around and, Clark Lee, what he did there. Eli Drinkwitz has a system at Missouri. Somebody, Kirby Moore calls it, but, Eli runs it as well. It's his system. I mean, that's good. That's elevated their program, I think. I mentioned Oklahoma making a change. I mean, in season, look at UCLA. Yet another quarterback I thought was just awful. Um, People are probably saying the same thing about Lenore Sellers. You'll never hear me say that. I'm not saying Lenore's is perfect, but I mean, Nico's playing in a system that obviously nobody knew what to do. It was uh, confusing. And then little Jerry Neuheisel takes over and says, we're just going to run it wide open. And look at how that's changed their season. They're 25-point underdogs at Indiana because Indiana will take your soul away. Indiana, I mean, Georgia Tech with Buster Faulkner. I mean, God, that system's college system. There are a plethora of those out there, is what I'm saying. And there's proof. I mentioned Clemson earlier. Everybody's got to remember when they fired Billy Napier as the OC. So yeah, it wasn't the first time Billy Napier's been let go from a job the other day, although he walked away with about 25 million more dollars than he did from Clemson. Um, they just weren't, a 2010 Jamie Harper and Kyle Parker and that group. They just couldn't move the ball. And then all of a sudden, they bring in Chad Morris and Taj Boyd ends up chunking it all over the place. Sammy Watkins. Now, were they perfect? No. They had to build back to it. But think about what that did for that program. Think about like they went from not being able to score to being able to score, and then they had to go fix their defense because they fired Kevin Steele, got Brent Venables in there or whatever. But think about what that did. But to 2010, Clemson was 6-7, weren't competitive against the Gamecocks defense up at Death Valley. They weren't competitive against Gamecocks defense the next year either, just to be clear. But 2011, they win their first ACC title in 20 years. That's how much picking the right guy and picking the right system on offense. On offense. Now you can screw it up on defense. Ask Eli Drinkwitz about that. You screw it up on defense too, but it's a little bit. Yeah, that's how much the wrong offense or the right offense matters. Sometimes the difference between a losing record and losing in what was it? Losing to South Florida in the Continental Tire Bowl that year at Clemson, and the next year winning the ACC, which is something they hadn't done in 20 years. Think about what moving on from James Coley and going to Todd Monken did for Georgia. Georgia was kind of heading in that direction anyway, but think about what Lane Kiffin and then the coordinators that followed him and the new plan on offense at Alabama did to keep that dynasty going. Think about what Joe Brady, Steve Ensminger did after Orgeron fires Matt Canada, who was a good hire on paper. Think about what loosening the reins and playing free college style offense has done. It can go the other way too if you get away from your DNA. And I'll use another example. Wisconsin screwed up royal. Luke Fickle screwed up royally. He waltzes in there and says, "We're not going to do ground and pound anymore." Well, you haven't won ever unless you've done ground and pound, And I'll say, bring it. I'll circle it back to South Carolina. You haven't won ever unless you've been not explosive, not high scoring, not 63-35 games, but different on offense. And I go back in time, run and shoot, Skip Holtz spread, Brad Scott's air raid, Steve Spurrier's offense all those years and kind of morphing it with the App State run game. That worked. It just, you got to be a little different at Carolina to have a competent offense, no matter who the quarterback's been. And it's a shame because you got a really good quarterback and he's still battling his ass off out there. And so what changes can they make between now and Saturday? I don't know. But I do think this. I think that this is not a change that Beamer has to make that is necessarily limited. There are a couple of falsehoods out there. The first falsehood is, oh, if you just change, and these are from people I think, and they're well intended. I understand everybody loves a coaching search and a new day when things aren't going well, because what does that do? And hell, I love coaching searches too. That'll be fun for me if I sat here and we had a coaching search to talk about. Right, fun for me. You make money that way too, but is it best for the program? No, not at all. Because and then there's a couple of rebuttals to that I just don't agree. I don't think they're true. I respect everybody's opinion on it, but the first one is he can't hire nobody's going to want to come work for him because he's on the hot seat. Not true. Not true. It's an SEC coordinator job. Some of your very, very best hires are at the group of five level because those guys have to like actually coach. You can't just roll players out there. D2 level, there's a ton of good guys that can coach. So you can at least find guys like that are just dying for the opportunity. That's first. That's A. It's an SEC coordinator job. B is that, nobody wants to work for Beamer. That's not true either. And people will use the fact that it's been Satterfield after Bobo left for Auburn, Satterfield, Dowell Loggins and Mike Shula. Well, those were Beamer's decisions. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, he didn't have anybody else to hire. He could have, Although, a lot of people want a Garrett Riley, and you hear Dabo talking about play calling this past weekend against SMU. So I don't know what's going on. Again, I haven't looked at it, but that was when they hired Dowell Loggins. It was a big meltdown when Clemson hired Garrett Riley. But there's plenty of coaches out there that would jump at the opportunity. There's plenty of options to get out of this NFL mess of a system that they run. It's just you got to do that in college football successfully. You got to block. You got to have just a great offensive line. Who has a great offensive line? I don't even know. Texas A&M is probably the best one in the league. Florida was supposed to have a great offensive line. Now, again, there's good offensive lines and average offensive lines, and nobody's really great. And then there's South Carolina, and how they've performed. And a lot of that's a function of you're asking too much there. And we're in an era too where it's the portal. South Carolina is going to be a portal team. Like I mentioned about Dowell Loggins, like everybody last year, the first part of the season, all he kept saying was picking up the system, learning, growing. You don't have time. You don't have time for when you have new guys like that for people to pick up the system and wait. Because what does that lead to? It leads to losses. And I don't think what Shula's asking them to do is all that complicated. Tree Babalade mentioned in the press conference this week that the blocking scheme has actually been simplified, which baffles me, which tells me again there needed to be definitely a change. We heard that over the summer. Blocking, I mean, on the part of Mike Shula, that's a smart move because there's confusion last year. Well, hell, they look confused almost every game now, and they've simplified it. It's on the record. But there's plenty of options out there. That's not a reason to make a head coaching change. And you don't want to get into a situation because anybody can just leave all they want. There is a new rule that states that what is it? That if there is a change, you have to wait until 5 days after the new guy's hired, give the new coach a chance. If it happens outside of the portal period, but if there's a coaching change after the Clemson game, I mean, what are the chances? I guess you'd have a new hire in place by December to get ready for the January portal period. Guys just can't jump in the portal in November, the 5 days afterward. And I'm not saying, look, I'm going to say this to conclude here because we've gone long again. I'm not saying that, again, if things get worse and you kind of start to look around and you're like, this situation's gone on down the river. And, sometimes one bad year will get you in this business. I'm not saying that, you go 3-9 and lose to Coastal at home, that there's not some decisions to make. And in that case, I'm not one of these people that says, well, you've got to keep all your players or they'll all leave. You can't worry about that. You can't. I mean, you want to, you can't because there's other players out there. So, go get them, go get more. That's that. As far as that goes. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's too much good when you look at it and you look, well, then what's the problem? The problem has been offense, namely the plan, not the vision, the how, the plan. And I think, will he fix it? You never know. I'm sure Clemson thought they were going to go back to scoring 50 points a game when they hired Garrett Riley, and didn't work. Nothing surprises me anymore in this game. Is Garrett Riley? I don't want to say that. Like, I was going to use a Baldwin Brothers reference, but I don't really see Billy. I don't know. But in this game, you just never know. So is it? Will it happen? No. Well, can it? Yes, absolutely. And it's not going to be all these talk. Let's talk about nobody's going to want to work. Yeah, that's not true. A lot of great coaches out there, man, and a lot are kind of lurking right around the corner that we haven't heard of that would be quite good. Now, what I didn't want to see is anybody from the NFL. If they work there somewhat, yeah, but you got to have a guy that has a proven track record. He's a play caller in college. Doesn't matter what level. Doesn't matter what level. Ben Arbuckle's at Oklahoma's 31 years old. Kenny Dillingham's 32 years old, head coach at Arizona State, great offensive coordinator. There's guys like that all over the place. But, there's certain parameters, that you want to look at on paper. But he can definitely chart a new course on offense that would be better. Because you're recruiting well. You got more players than you ever have. Your defense is fine. Special teams is fine. No need to blow it up. A lot of coaching changes this offseason. And for the schools that keep their coach and keep some stability or that are in the market for coordinators, there's a lot of coaches assistants, they're going to need jobs. Staffs get fired. Even if you're a good coach on a staff, some people are like, well, why didn't so-and-so keep him? He's probably not that good. No, it's not true. Coaches every coach that's come into Carolina has let at least a few good coaches go because they just got their own guy. And you got to coach with who you're comfortable with, right? So there's going to be a flood of good assistant coaches and then a flood of players as well that just don't jive with the new guy. So there's opportunity in the offseason if you play your cards right. Again, I understand last week was frustrating for everybody. It was for me too. I absolutely, if I were Beamer, would hand the play calling over to my receivers coach as long as he did call the plays at Limestone and, chop the head off of the snake, so to speak, and let Shula stick around if he wanted to and coach quarterbacks. But that's just me. And I don't, they don't ask my opinion, right? On it. Now, I'll add this and I'll finish up. 55 minutes, man, or so. Gosh, a lot to say this week. If there was a change in play calling going into the Alabama game, and I'm not talking about scrapping the offense and starting over. I've said all week, there are plays in the playbook, plenty of them that they practiced that, everybody's got a 2-minute offense, right? Or whatever, if you want to spread it and go fast. If they did change play callers, what are the chances Shane Beamer comes out and says that? 0.0. That's just him. It's there's some things around there that are state secrets that I don't understand why they're state secrets, but there's some things around there like this that are state secrets that I get it. You don't want to tip those guys off, and you kind of hope you can surprise Alabama. I have no information on that. I'm not being coy and winking, nodding. I'm just saying that, he's probably not going to go announce that there's a new play caller so everybody can go dig up film on whoever. That's just how coaches are. But he said that there's not, so I'm not going to accuse him of lying. Anyway, don't forget, the show's coming up later. It's Wide Open Wednesday, so you can get in the Nana Sports chat box, fire questions at me, comments, concerns. We'll probably play some more Gamecock graffiti today. That's been a very popular thing. Tune into the show today. I'll give you the number. I don't have it in front of me. It's 803-850-1267 or 97. 1297. So check that out. That's okay. So it's 803-850. Sorry. Good God. Scrap that. 803-250-1297. That's 803-250-1297. Name and hometown. Keep it pithy, and you can get on the air. Then tonight, Sports Talk with Phil Kornblut at 6 to 8, and then the Late Night Gamecock Show. By the way, if you're a fan of the Late Night Gamecock Show and Rooster Rant, listen to this on podcast form. You can now go to Apple Pods or Spotify, hit that subscribe button, and get that show weekly and Rooster Rant and all kinds of other stuff right there, free of charge. Rate it 5 stars, Matt and Alex tonight. All right, this has been Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday, and try not to get too frustrated about the coordinator press conferences later. Holla at you.
JC and Mad Dog Mully on the Gamecock Show.